So I'm sure you've all probably already accepted that cardiac arrest is the final common pathway for every single one of us. And in spite of all the advances in intra-arrest and post-cardiac arrest care, survival remains absolutely abysmal. Only about 12% of patients who suffer an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest actually make it to hospital discharge. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, we know patients die, one, from the original etiology of the arrest, but they're also dying from what happens after return of spontaneous circulation. So we have the arrest and then return of spontaneous circulation, which is ROSC, and this represents the ultimate whole-body ischemia-reperfusion injury. During circulatory arrest, the body resorts to anaerobic metabolism. During anaerobic metabolism, the pH in the cells will drop, and proteins and enzymes are dysfunctional. And that's like the first hit. And this is like a two-hit phenomenon. The second hit comes with the restoration of circulation and return to aerobic metabolism. There's a burst of reactive oxygen species and calcium influx into cells. And this leads to an activation of a robust inflammatory cascade. So all of this ultimate ischemia-reperfusion injury leads to varying degrees of anoxic brain injury, myocardial dysfunction, stunning, and systemic inflammation. So what we do know is that this second insult is actually ongoing. It starts with ROSC, and it kind of continues for the hours to days afterwards. Now, I'm not that old, Rich. I'm not that old. But I can remember during my residency when we had a patient who had return of spontaneous circulation and they were hemodynamically unstable. We pretty much thought that they were doomed. We thought that we started to prognosticate sort of immediately after return of spontaneous circulation. And the approach somewhat was, well, we'll support them, but it's just sort of wait and watch and see what happens and hope that they wake up. It was with the success of targeted temperature management that we began to see that could possibly intervene and make a difference. So our group was interested in what other factors other than body temperature might lead to or assist in better outcomes after return of spontaneous circulation. So we took a look at blood pressure. There were some animal studies that showed improved outcomes when they intervened on hemodynamics in animals, so we said, let's look at blood pressure. So in 2008, we reported the results of a retrospective chart review. And any study I mentioned during this is going to be on adult patients after return of spontaneous circulation who were comatose after an atraumatic arrest, so no trauma was included. And we defined hypotension in this cohort as systolic blood pressure less than 90. And exposure to hypotension was 2 measured systolic blood pressures less than 90 in the first 6 hours after ROSC. And what we found is not only was it common, but it was an independent predictor of mortality. So we followed up with this retrospective review, and we performed a prospective study. And in 2014, we published the results of our prospective study. We included 151 patients, and what we found is that time-weighted mean arterial pressure in the 6 hours after a ROSC is associated with a good neurological outcome at a threshold effect over 70 millimeters of mercury. So what do other authors say on this topic? Well, not too much has been done with regards to blood pressure after cardiac arrest. This is a systematic review from Bate and colleagues, and they took a look at the literature and what was available with regards to isolation of blood pressure and outcome. And they only found 9 studies that were relevant, and 7 of the 9 actually showed improved outcomes with higher MATs. So, armed with animal studies and some of this observational data, the AHA added in their guidelines, and pretty much the international consensus is that it's probably reasonable to at least avoid hypotension after cardiac arrest. And they set a minimum goal of 90 for the systolic blood pressure and 65 for the mean arterial pressure. 65 MAP is like having a blood pressure of 90 over 55. I think I'd be pretty dizzy with that blood pressure. So it's a pretty low minimum there. So is it the inevitable poor outcome driving the MAP down, or is the low MAP actually contributing to the poor outcome? So in trying to figure out this complex relationship, I mean, the long and the short of it is, I think the answer to both is yes. looked to the literature, and I found at least one study by Dr. Balin and Dr. Gajewski here, and they actually took a look at the relationships between vasoactive agents, blood pressure, and outcome in cardiac arrest. And what they found is, overall, when a patient requires a vasoactive agent, they have poor outcomes. But in the patients, like the subset of patients that actually were on vasoactive agents, the ones who managed to get their blood pressures a little bit higher, did a little bit better. Can also maybe look at these before and after studies where some of these authors sort of implemented a comprehensive bundle approach where they had like target maps. Most of the target maps are like higher than the AHA's minimum there. And they showed that, like with comparison to historical controls, the patients in the intervention group, where they used like a comprehensive strategy, including higher maps, actually did better. But we can't really draw a conclusion about whether or not blood pressure contributed to this at all. So in order to understand why I would think that blood pressure might matter in the post-arrest period, one of the concepts that I like to look at is that of cerebral autoregulation. So under normal circumstances, our blood flow sort of self-regulates, and with MAP fluctuations, our blood flow will maintain like a sort of steady state just by arterial vasoconstriction and dilation. So basically, the blood flow to our brain is not subjected to the whims of our circulatory system. After cardiac arrest, though, this cerebral autoregulation is disrupted, and this curve in some of the patients is shifted to the right. So here at like a normal MAP or a low normal MAP, perfusion to the brain is probably not adequate. So this is from our group again. This is not hot off the presses because it hasn't even been submitted for publication yet. But we took a look at another prospective study. This is 269 patients from a multi-center study. And we actually, for this analysis, we took out all the patients in shock. So all we did here was we compare those with normal MAPs to higher MAPs. And what we found, what appears to be, this is time-weighted mean arterial pressure over the first 6 hours after cardiac arrest. And this appears to be a dose-response association between MAP and good neurological outcome. From this same cohort, we looked at time-weighted MAP greater than 90, and we looked to see if it was an independent predictor of good neurological outcome. In all these groups in all of these groups of patients, it was an independent predictor of a good neural outcome at discharge. So, the guidelines currently call for hemodynamic optimization in the post-arrest period. Well, hemodynamic means blood flow, not just blood pressure. So it's very important to remember, as we're trying to optimize perfusion, we don't sacrifice the interests of the heart just to protect the injured brain. So somebody asked me, what is the Kilgannon secret sauce for post-cardiac arrest management? So I'll share with you what I do with the disclaimer that it's subject to change as any high-quality data becomes available. So first, I treat the etiology of arrest. If there is an unknown cause of arrest, I call early for evaluation for coronary intervention, even if the ECG is normal. So I treat the vasodilatory shock. I start with isotonic fluids and move to vasopressors. We usually use norepinephrine. We get an early bedside echo and augment cardiac function if needed with an ionotrope like dobutamine. And what MAP do I target? Well, in not wanting to go rogue with my hypotheses, because there are no randomized controlled trials, I usually target a MAP around 80. That being said, I try really hard not to let it go below 65, or not even to get into the 60 range. Now, some of you might be saying, well, it's not really a secret sauce. We all do that. But I think what I've learned from the last decade of performing research in this blood pressure and its relation to outcome is that the secret ingredient is, and here it is, to pay attention. And you'd say, well, no, duh. Of course we're going to pay attention. These are the sickest people in the department. No, I mean really pay attention. In that first study, we showed that even 2 dips below 90 in the first 6 hours had a much worse outcome. And time-weighted MAP average over 70 over 6 hours actually had a much better neurological outcome. So although we can't show causation from our work, because it was all observational studies and we didn't randomize them and intervene, what I can say is there's enough evidence for me to say that I need to be more attentive at the bedside and be a little bit more aggressive with blood pressure. Questions?